In a world where justice reigns supreme, he who holds the power to judge others is absolute. In the depiction of Lady Justice, her eyes are wrapped by a blindfold, blinded from the decisions she is forced to make, whether they be moral or immoral, as true justice cannot turn a blind eye to the sentences casted down. True justice is unforgiving, and thus, a true judge, by that logic, must follow suit. In the early days of his career, this is something that the newly awakened sorcerer Higuruma Hiromi could not accept. As Higuruma says himself, when he sees something wrong, he just can't ignore it. As a defense lawyer in a world of blind justice, as the one who stands between the law and his clients, Higuruma vows to keep his eyes open. It's this reason alone that when offered to strive towards becoming a judge, Higuruma Hiromi originally declines the offer. As someone who chooses to take an eyes wide open approach to justice, Higuruma thought himself unwilling to cast judgment on others, choosing instead to fight for the weak and those who stood powerless against the stranglehold of the law. Higuruma would strive for difficult cases, not for the fun of it, but because there was more to those cases than blind Lady Justice was willing to offer. Victims set up to take the fall, innocent clients who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Higuruma was truly able to live his principles through the line of work he associated himself with. When the law wouldn't give an accused a second thought, Higuruma would hold strong, fighting tooth and nail for his clients, despite not having quite a reputation for ever coming out on top in these cases. Underneath the boot of the law, even an amazing lawyer like Higuruma was unable to prove his client's innocence, somehow always ending up with the largest portion of the blame placed on him by his clients after failing to help them. False hope can truly be damaging to the soul, not only for the accused, but for the one who fought so damn hard to create that hope for them. Higuruma would eventually succumb to his failures, his principles knocked down by one too many losses. And in this moment of acknowledgement, Higuruma awakens to his curse technique. It is here, in these critical seconds of a manic collapse, Higuruma accepts the futile dominance of his antithesis. If the world was so corrupt victory couldn't be achieved by playing by the rules, perhaps Higuruma would have much better success being the one to enforce those rules. Upon the rule edition from Hajime Kashimo, our gang of protagonists, after the recruitment of Hikari Kinji and Kirara Hoshi, are able to pinpoint the two closest sorcerers with 100 points. In an attempt to secure the points for themselves, they split into groups to hunt down and possibly use those points to create new rules in the Culling Game that will benefit them, and allow for an ideal situation to save Sumiki and let themselves escape the games without having to go through too much trouble. Unfortunately, upon entering the Tokyo colony, Megami and Yuji are unexpectedly split up and teleported to separate areas in the colony. Megami's arrival gets him caught up with a woman named Remy, leading him to what he believes is Higuruma, but what turns out to be a group of sorcerers luring unwitting prey to steal their points. As for where Yuji ends up, after a small scuffle with a band of low-level sorcerers, he meets up with an old classmate that shows him where he can find Higuruma, an old theater in Ikebukuro. At this point in the story, now that Yuji has officially joined the Culling Game, we've seen this new force of determination that he carries with him, as a cog in the cycle of cursed extermination. Yuji is able to immediately dispatch threats that even catch him completely off guard, reflecting his improved senses and combat adaptability. Yuji, who was originally very vulnerable to long-range attackers, is now quick-witted enough to use more of the environment to his advantage and combine that with what seems like complete mastery of cursed energy manipulation. Yuji is clearly very impressionable as well, as this little rock move that Yuji uses is something that he picked up from Todo back in Shibuya. All of the amazing people that Yuji has been lucky enough to interact with have all contributed into molding him into the absolute monster that he is today. Even before joining the Culling Game, Yuji's tenacity can be seen in his confrontation with Hikari, braced enough in his philosophies to take some of the hardest blows Yuji's probably ever been dealt, displaying enough ferocity to impress even Hikari himself and get him to accept the request to join as an ally. Despite being absolutely traumatized from the massacre at Shibuya, after his final encounter with Mahito, Itadori has embraced his role completely and does not waver in the slightest in the face of any threat. Yuji's placed all of the blame for the destruction caused on himself. Even though Sukuna is completely at fault, Yuji's self-righteous and guilty nature doesn't allow an excuse. This not only plays into the newfound destructive power that now emanates around Yuji from a new sense of purpose, but this resolve has created a sorcerer able to pursue his goals without constant remorse, allowing Yuji to easily eliminate threats like the group of rookies that ambush him without much consideration. Yuji's eyes remain on his ultimate goal, and those who step in to block him of that are met without any mercy. When the two sorcerers meet, there is very little hostility. Two people whose worlds have crumbled, enemies of circumstance, not of ideology. Higuruma lay, bathing in a tub on center stage. Drenched but fully clothed, he claims himself to have gone off the rails, saying it's because he's trying to focus on challenging himself to do things that are out of the ordinary. It has to be noted here that it appears Higuruma has lost all sense of self between now and the start of the Culling Game. His sense of justice, his belief in fighting for what should be right, all of this was smothered by his constant loss in the face of the law. Finally suffocated by this new power that he's been granted. The power to escape and unravel this web of corruption he's found himself stuck in. Intrigued by the Culling Game, Higuruma has found new comfort in the less arbitrary, more absolute rules that are laid out by the Culling Game. Higuruma explains that curse technique removal and the point system, in his eyes, create a dynamic inside the colony that at its heart cannot be corrupted or abused by a higher power. In other words, it creates balance. No unfair hierarchies, no unequal footing. In this world, with his newly awakened powers, Higuruma can drop the hammer of justice himself to those worthy of his wrath. When he is introduced, Higuruma has managed to net 102 points. Since the beginning of the Culling Game, Higuruma has judged many a sorcerer, including the judge and prosecutor whose lives he judged in his heated breakdown. The position of judge being so fresh for Higuruma, he does not intend to let the Culling Game end so soon, much to Yuji's dismay. In fact, Higuruma even wishes to see curse removal at least once, proving just how bored and dissociated this once modern man has become in only a matter of days. Despite Yuji's pleas to save the people of Japan, Higuruma is too jaded to even lend an ear. Yuji, very aware there isn't any agreement to be had through conversation, accepts there is no other choice but to fight. Yuji needs Higuruma in order to create a rule that will allow the transfer of points to elude cursed removal. Before stepping any further, it's important to stop here and dissect just what makes Higuruma so powerful. Despite being a newly awakened sorcerer, he's able to present such a challenge to Yuji, someone who, though to be honest doesn't hold much more, still maintains a vastly superior amount of it over his last year as a sorcerer. Higuruma Hiromi was a born prodigy. A genius is what many called him. Any obstacle that was put in his way, law school, licensing exams, Higuruma was able to retain the necessary knowledge and use it to his full advantage effortlessly. This knack for quick learning benefited him greatly when it came to sorcery, of course. Lucky enough to be endowed with a Shikigami born with a domain expansion from the very beginning. It was explained by Tengen that nowadays, domain expansions are rare due to most modern sorcerers incorporating a one-hit kill technique into the domain, making it much more advanced to master. However, in olden days, domains tended to be more condition-based, or handicap-inducing, shown through this example of a domain creating a condition where your opponent's feet cannot leave the ring, or the opponent loses. Higuruma, starting from domain expansion, was able to analyze his domain from the inside out and fully understand the way barriers and cursed energy worked in tandem. By deconstructing barrier techniques, he was able to achieve a general mastery of them, and by continuing to work his way backwards from there, it resulted in a fluid control of cursed energy. All of this culminated into the complete grasp of his curse technique in a couple of days, placing Higuruma at the same level as a grade 1 sorcerer. A more than equal match for someone like Yuji. Being at similar levels, it's not a surprise Yuji wasn't expecting to be hit with a domain expansion. Despite this, Yuji is immediately able to adapt to the situation, making a plan to take out Higuruma before his technique is activated. Going to show just how much Yuji's growing as a sorcerer and how familiar he is becoming with the threats he can be presented with. Higuruma's domain accurately reflects his newfound personality as a judge, creating the full scene of the courtroom, podiums for both caster and accused, and gallows that encircle the both of them. Higuruma's Shikigami rises, front and center, the court trial revolving around any crimes the accused has committed throughout their life. Higuruma then receives evidence based on that crime, and the accused is presented the option to either admit to the crime, deny the crime, or remain silent. Then, based on the statement by the accused, Higuruma will then present his side of the evidence on the allegations. Based on that exchange of evidence, Higuruma's Shikigami, Judge Man, makes a final decision of innocence or guilt, vowing to punish the accused accordingly. Yuji is accused of entering a pachinko parlor and underage gambling. Considering all of his options, Yuji chooses to lie, claiming he just needed to take a poop and used the location for the bathroom. However, the evidence revealed to Higuruma shows that Yuji was actually exchanging currency, proving that he lied and that he's guilty of the crime. With the guilty verdict handed down, Judgment reveals Yuji's punishment will be confiscation. The domain disperses, and at first, Yuji is confused. He wasn't executed or even harmed at all really, as he assumed he would be. But before he even has time to react, Higuruma immediately throws his gavel at Yuji, morphing it to the size of a large mallet and smacking Yuji into the back of the theater. Higuruma compliments Yuji on his durability, genuinely surprised he was able to tank that hit with only minor injuries. After recovering from the blow, Yuji finally notices that it is his cursed energy that has been stolen. It's obvious now how Higuruma was able to obtain so many points in such a short few days of the Culling Game. The punishment of confiscation is originally a punishment of cursed technique confiscation. Obviously, with Yuji not having access to a cursed technique, it cannot be stolen, resulting in just his cursed energy being taken. Any other sorcerer, however, would have their technique completely stolen from them. This also normally disrupts cursed energy manipulation anyway, as Higuruma mentions, due to the technique removal breaking habits many sorcerers fall into with their innate technique. By stripping sorcerers of their technique and making them completely vulnerable, Higuruma's domain spells ultimate disaster for most that come up against it. Unfortunately for Higuruma, his opponent is Yuji Itadori. Built like 14 trucks sitting on top of a helicopter, despite losing all control of his cursed energy, Yuji maintains his strength and durability, keeping up with Higuruma as the latter's onslaught with his shape-shifting hammer begins. With the ability to change the shape of his hammer, Higuruma is capable of fighting toe-to-toe with a combat expert like Itadori, able to transform his gavel into a giant mallet, a whip, even an elongated lance-type weapon. Higuruma is also able to have the gavel vanish and remanifest at will, creating pure versatility in close quarters battle. And being up against an opponent like Yuji, all of this is exactly what Higuruma needs to stand his ground. The odds do fall in his favor, as all of this included with confiscation of Yuji's cursed energy, Higuruma is able to push Yuji back up against the wall. Unable to create an opening or even go on the offensive at all for that matter, Yuji's one attempt is to kick the bathtub, and it immediately failed, putting him in an even worse situation than he was before. Luckily though, this isn't the same Yuji who's scared he'll get dumber from being knocked in the head too many times. His tactical knowledge that he's gained over the multiple battles he's taken part in, as well as the teammates that he shared the battlefield with, have all combined and seeped into his instincts. After much quick deliberation on the themes and symbolism of Higuruma's curse technique, he's able to decipher that a retrial can be called. And by the grace of God, this works, and the fight is completely reset. The domain re-emerges, and both sorcerers are returned to their podiums, where Yuji will again be judged, this time for his next crime down the list. I mean, his first crime was for underage gambling. How bad could the next one be? Oh. Yuji is placed on retrial for the mass murder that took place on October 31st during the Shibuya incident. And it's really interesting to stop and think about it in this moment. When faced with a small crime like underage gambling, Yuji's willing to lie in the face of the law. A victimless crime imposed on the young, right? But faced with the reality of the souls wiped from the earth by his own hands, Yuji swallows any sense of pride that he has, and in full admission of his vulnerabilities and weakness, Yuji acknowledges his crime in front of Higuruma. The inner turmoil inside of Itadori burns with a fire that may never go out. Someone who believes they'll never be able to redeem for the crime they committed. This self-loathing becomes self-actualization in Yuji's hands. And it's ironic that, although he's not able to forgive himself, this weakness makes it possible for others to do that for him. With the admission of guilt resulting in the death penalty, staring his sentencing in the face, Yuji looks on with acceptance. While on the other hand, Higuruma looks disturbed, his expression that of surprise. Having knowledge of the evidence before using it in the trial, Higuruma was already briefed that it was actually not Yuji himself that committed the massacre. The evidence had confirmed the cursed Sukuna, who possessed Yuji's body at the time, actually was responsible. Having his body taken control of at the time, Yuji, for all intents and purposes, cannot be held liable for this crime in a court of law. Yuji had only needed to admit Sukuna was at play, and he could have avoided the death penalty. Knowing this, why would Yuji take the fall for something so heinous? The answer is something Higuruma had lost since awakening to his technique, and yet somehow it all came rushing back in such a short amount of time. As the domain disperses once again, the death penalty sentence was set into action. Inside Higuruma's hands, in place of his gavel, emerged a sword of pure light, deemed the executioner's sword. The blade carries out the death sentences casted down from Judgment. With a single touch of the sword, an accused has all life snuffed out from them immediately, and the sentence is carried out. With the power to judge once again in his grasp, this time, however, Higuruma finds himself with hesitation. Although judgment has come for many before, those had all seemed so easy. Flooding through Higuruma's mind were the feelings of victims, the feelings of accused, the weakness and vulnerability in their faces. Real human beings that were cast away by the system of justice for this very weakness. That same weakness Higuruma has finally come face to face with in Yuji. But this new Higuruma, the sorcerer Higuruma, blinded like Lady Justice by his new powers, justified by the new society the Culling Game offers, this weakness is something Higuruma cannot allow. Higuruma can't hold back his shouts. But truthfully, Higuruma's rant about weak people, his claims that no matter how great you aspire to be, there's nothing but darkness that awaits to extinguish your flames, Higuruma isn't yelling at Yuji, he's yelling at himself. As Higuruma truly attempts to carry out the sentence, his cries of anger are more of an attempt to convince himself of this philosophy than anything else. Finally pit against an opponent that is a mirror of Higuruma's past worldview, Higuruma's resolve begins to waver. As this final clash of wills comes to a head, Higuruma's hardened shell starts to give. Presented now an opportunity to take the lead by using the environment around him, even the literal clothes on his back, Yuji's able to enter a final deadlock with Higuruma, risking it all, as he normally does. And Higuruma, now forced to confront everything he previously stood for, met with the face of Yuji's weakness and guilt, decided unfairly upon him. Higuruma stands at the crossroads of life. Is he a blindfolded judge carrying out a sentence, or is he a defense lawyer that strives to keep their eyes open to the nuance of justice itself? Through one final reconciliation with who he is, Higuruma finds his answer. Once a man who believed the vulnerability of humans was something to be celebrated, Higuruma could not shake his principle of stepping in to right what was wrong. Executioner's sword in hand, Itadori Yuji is sentenced to death for a crime he did not commit. Despite the immorality of the decision, this will bring retribution to the crime. One slash, and the punishment is carried out. All Higuruma needs to do is put the blindfold on. It's only as Yuji's fist made connection with Higuruma's solar plexus did the realization he dismissed his curse technique himself actually come over him. Knocked back into a pile of chairs Yuji had tossed earlier in the battle, Higuruma blankly stares into the very abyss he had just claimed every human was smothered by. Only this time, when he looks into it, there's a dim flicker of light, Yuji's light, that Higuruma is finally able to see, now able to find his own spirit amongst the darkness. A much more fierce battle, one of the mind, that probably could never be described in words or pictures, took place inside of Higuruma. To Itadori, it can only appear as a sudden change of heart, but for Higuruma, I'm sure he stared at that fork in the road for what may have seemed like millennia. When asked why Higuruma would stop his technique and abruptly end the fight, Higuruma could only respond with, "I remembered why I got into law in the first place." A sentence that, surprisingly, greatly encapsulates the personal struggle Yuji was able to awaken inside of Higuruma. Looking through Yuji, Higuruma was able to see every single client he's ever fought for, all the sleepless nights working and researching, every doubt casted from his peers when taking impossible cases, the undeniable fact that no matter how oppressive the world and its systems may seem, there will always be good people living in it that are worth fighting for. Finally able to see the light in the darkness. For a short moment, Higuruma confides within Yuji about the blood that taints his hands. Able to find some small comfort in being able to relate with that guilt, Higuruma agrees to let Itadori use his 100 points. The short battle between Higuruma and Yuji was such an amazing clash of ideals, and just what made it all the more intense was just the whole backstory we got with Higuruma in the previous couple chapters. I hope I was able to explain just how much writing and in-depth characterization really went into Higuruma. Such a perfectly written character for such a small role in the Jujutsu Kaisen narrative, And honestly, even though my predictions were wrong with him fighting Megami, I feel like his fight with Yuji was much better than I could have predicted and held a lot more weight. Yuji was such a special case of being in a shitty situation for being possessed by Sukuna and really not having too much responsibility for killing all of those people in Shibuya, even though it was in his own body. The man has really been through it, and like I said previously in the video, just the way he reacts to the pachinko parlor accusation compared to the accusation of the massacre, it really just shows how this trauma is affecting him. Always maintaining this carefree, lovable himbo side of him that all of us clearly love and relate to, but on the inside, he's really clearly got this dark pit that's starting to build up and take over. He was really the perfect person to wake Higuruma up, which, I mean, compared to Yuji's strife, Higuruma more or less just kind of lost his way. His main representation is just to show how being under an oppressive system like a 99% conviction rate being a lawyer can be very rough on someone, just constantly getting dealt bad hands, and how dealing with corruption, if given the power to turn the tables, you can become corrupt yourself. I'm glad that Higuruma doesn't come across as this typical god complex character who was corrupted beyond belief and is now irredeemable. I mean, if anything, from what it seems like in his time with the Culling Game, he really doesn't mess with anyone that doesn't mess with him. When him and Yuji meet up, they're honestly just chatting it up at first. It's really believable and such a real feeling to the character, because, I mean, honestly, you have to imagine, after killing the judge and the prosecutor, that probably even solidified the personality change even more and made him go down that path. After murdering people, I mean, I feel like it would create such a sense of not being able to go back to the way things are ever again, and walking down that dark path just gets a lot easier. It's also more believable that when he turns around, he realizes what he's done and feels guilty about it, for the fact that once he comes back to his senses and decides to leave, he even says when the Culling Games are over, he's going to turn himself in, which really just shows how he relates to Yuji with not being able to forgive himself for the lives that he's taken. Either way, long story short, love this battle. Loved Higuruma as a character, and I hope we do get to see him later in the series as an ally or something like that. If you want more Higuruma content, I did make another video about his backstory a while ago. Thank you so much if you made it all the way to this point in the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you that watch these videos and support me. I work really hard on each and every one of these, and the response is just great, and it really inspires me to keep going. That being said, be sure to like, comment, and share this video around to anyone you think that may enjoy it. Definitely subscribe if you want to see more content like this, because you know there's more coming your way. Follow me on Twitter to stay up to date with what I'm doing, and join the subreddit for the channel for some discourse. Thank you again for watching. I really appreciate it and love you guys. This is your second reminder to hit the subscribe button and the like button, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.